My wife is Charlotte. I'm divorcing you to marry her. Take that useless child and get out quickly. Matteo presented the divorce papers to me with an arrogant attitude. Charlotte, with a smug smile, snuggled up to Matteo and looked down on me disdainfully. To them, I must appear as a pitiful person. However, they do not realize how foolish they actually are. I find it profoundly sad. Do you understand what you're saying? Do you really think you can just get a divorce? My mother stated this firmly to them. I am Ava Jones, a 32-year-old housewife. I have been married to Matteo for 3 years. I live with my in-laws at their home, where our family is about to grow. I am currently pregnant, and the birth is imminent. Recently, as my belly has begun to show, conversations with neighbors about the baby make me increasingly excited to meet my child. After a long period of infertility treatments, I finally conceived my first child. There were times during treatment when my spirit nearly broke, but seeing my baby's growth during regular checkups always soothed my heart. While I have some nerves and anxiety about giving birth, the joy and anticipation far outweigh them. Incidentally, my doctor has informed me that the baby is a girl. Regardless of whether my child is a girl or a boy, I plan to enjoy whatever path they choose, and I am imagining a bright future for them. Yet Matteo's reaction was surprisingly different. A girl? Really? Yes, that's what the doctor said. No way. What? As soon as he knew it was a girl, Matteo looked very displeased. He was clearly disappointed. Matteo had wanted a child and was very happy when he learned of the pregnancy. But now he even says, I don't need a girl. The reaction from my in-laws was the same, nodding in agreement with Matteo's opinion. Why does it have to be a girl? Absolutely unbelievable. There's no point in her being born. Despite being their own child or grandchild, how can my husband and in-laws say such cruel things so casually? I felt intense anger at their words, but I desperately suppressed it, preparing myself to endure the days ahead. I began to be treated coldly by my husband and in-laws. Ava, take good care of the baby in your belly and rest. My former mother-in-law used to say this to me. However, since the gender became known, she started saying harshly, Hurry up and finish the housework, and you're so slow it's irritating. Furthermore, knowing I was pregnant, they would deliberately make me carry heavy things. Neither my father-in-law nor Matteo helped with the housework at all, they just complained. Are you going to make us eat such awful food? Are you slacking off just because you're pregnant? Dad is right. They only want a boy and see a girl as nothing but a nuisance. Even so, I shouldn't have to endure such terrible treatment. For my child's sake, I have resisted this humiliating situation and protested many times, but they only mocked me more. Whether the coming child is a boy or a girl, they are precious. I continued to argue that they should stop belittling us, but it had no effect. Relying on us and can't even produce an heir, what can an incompetent wife like you say? Mateo and my in-laws dismissively said that. No matter how hard I worked or how earnestly I pleaded for them to change their attitude and help with the chores, it did not resonate with them. And I was left to wear myself out, both mentally and physically, alone. Their attitude only escalated. Children are a hassle, and they cost money. Why don't you just get an abortion? I never imagined my mother-in-law, a mother herself, would say such a thing. My father-in-law laughed uproariously in agreement with the idea, and Mateo sneered. Perhaps they lack the essential human decency. I deeply regretted becoming family with such people. After that, I minimized my interactions with them, avoiding them except during meals. I stayed in my room most of the time, and when possible, I would take long walks to pass the time. I didn't want to be with them at all. However, they would come to my room to continue hurling insults, pushing me to the brink mentally. Eventually, I reached my limit, and like when I was undergoing infertility treatments, I began to cry uncontrollably at night. Staying in this house would surely drive me insane. I was on the verge of despair, about to fall. Continuing to live here would also negatively affect the baby in my womb, and a safe delivery would be utterly impossible. I immediately contacted my mother, who lives alone. I decided to return to my parents' home earlier for the baby's birth. "Hello, Mom, I need to talk to you. Is it okay if I come home earlier than planned?" "Of course you can come back any time if you're okay with it." "Thank you, it really helps." Ava, that voice. "Something's happened, hasn't it? Don't overdo it. Come back right away." Sensing something was wrong from my demeanor, my mother warmly welcomed me back. My mother is truly amazing. I want to be able to protect my child like she does. As I thought that way, I gently put my hand on my stomach. Then I quickly packed my things, and 2 days later, I was able to return to my parents' home. Upon arriving at my parents' home, the warm and nostalgic atmosphere almost brought me to tears. The space was so different from the stifling home of my in-laws that I instinctively took a deep breath, and at dinner, I tasted my mother's cooking for the first time in a long while, which was comforting. My mother always cared for my health. In my in-laws' home, despite there being 4 people, I always felt alone, and being back here made me realize how comforting and warming it is to have someone who understands and supports me. Although I was finally having some peaceful time, my feelings of unease hadn't completely cleared. In fact, my distrust towards Mateo and his parents only grew. Since returning home, not only had Mateo not come to visit, but there had also been no contact at all. I didn't mind not hearing from my in-laws because dealing with them was painful, but what was Mateo thinking as the father of my child? He showed no concern for my health. Perhaps to him, I was no longer of any importance. Even my mother sensed something was amiss with the lack of contact from him. "Why hasn't Mateo contacted us?" she asked one day, but I didn't know how to answer and just shook my head. And without any contact from Mateo, the time for childbirth finally came. In the delivery room, my mother held my hand the entire time and taught me breathing techniques. I wondered how much time had passed since the labor pains began, my consciousness started to blur. "Ava, hang in there. You'll meet your baby soon. You're a strong woman. It'll be all right." Thanks to my mother, I managed to keep breathing even in the toughest moments. "Ava, congratulations. You did great. She's a beautiful baby." With tears flowing, my mother celebrated the birth of the baby. Happiness seemed to radiate from my newborn, and I couldn't stop my tears either. Although my heart was filled with joy, a bit of sadness lingered due to Matteo's absence. When the labor pains began, I tried to contact Matteo repeatedly. I sent many messages and made several calls, but there was no response, only the impersonal electronic tone of the phone ringing endlessly. Wondering if he wasn't answering because it was my smartphone, I even tried calling from my mother's phone, but Matteo never picked up. After giving birth, Matteo never showed his face at my parents' home, and 2 months quickly passed. The first months of parenting were busy with diaper changes, feedings, and responding to night cries. When the baby cried at night, my mother would take over, saying, "I'll take care of her. You get some rest, allowing me to get some sleep." Thanks to my mother's constant support, I was able to get through the toughest times. The parenting knowledge I learned from my mother, an experienced parent herself, was invaluable, and gradually I became capable of managing on my own. During this time, I continued to send photos and videos of the child's growth to Matteo and my in-laws, but I doubted they were even looking at them. The lack of responses made me feel they were indifferent or not even viewing the updates, which was disheartening. I continued calling without ever receiving a reply, and my anxiety and doubts only grew. After enduring this for a while, I could not leave the issue unresolved any longer and finally decided to return to my in-laws' house with my child. My mother agreed to accompany me on the trip back, which was both comforting and a relief. As I held the house key in my hand in front of the in-laws' home for the first time in a long while, memories of before my return to my parents' house flooded back, and my hands trembled. When I slowly turned the doorknob, unexpectedly, I could hear children's laughter and a woman's laughter inside, and I instantly pictured who it might be. Matteo has no female relatives, and all his cousins are unmarried men. It was clear that these were not relatives. With my mind going blank in shock, I courageously opened the door. In the entrance, I saw unfamiliar small red shoes and women's-sized sneakers, none of which I recognized. My mother also looked on in astonishment. We immediately entered the house and hurried toward the source of the voices. When I reached the living room, there was an unfamiliar woman and a young boy. "Who are you?" I exclaimed in surprise, and Matteo, along with my in-laws, appeared from the back of the room. "Why are you entering like this on your own? And you even brought your mother. How rude of you!" "Just wait a minute, Matteo. Are these people acquaintances of someone?" I asked, bewildered. Without any sign of disturbance, Matteo pulled the woman close to him. There was an obvious intimate atmosphere between them. The woman, with a provocative look, stared at me and approached. "This is my girlfriend and our child. You should be able to figure that out," Matteo said smugly, as if he had won something. "What do you mean, our child?" I looked intently at the boy, who seemed about 2 years old. "So when you say my girlfriend and our child, You mean she's your mistress? Calculating back from the child's age, Matteo likely began his affair with this woman about 3 years ago. It's boring to be with someone plain like you, so I had no choice. It's all your fault, Matteo laughed arrogantly. Despite my mother being there, they continued with their harsh words mercilessly. As usual, my in-laws did nothing to stop Matteo's behavior. Had they known about this all along? No, they must have known from the beginning, and all of them mocked me together. Why must I, who has done nothing wrong, continue to be insulted like this? Sorry for stealing Matteo from you, the mistress sneered. Her name was Charlotte, and she was 26 years old. Charlotte worked as a bottle girl, and it all started when she met Matteo, who came in as a customer. Matteo often claimed he was working late, but in reality, he was meeting with Charlotte, and eventually, they began their secret rendezvous. As a result of these meetings, Charlotte became pregnant, a fact they hid for a while. However, once it was confirmed that the baby was a boy, Matteo proudly informed his parents. My son has done well. This is fantastic, exclaimed my mother-in-law in joy. An affair is not a problem. What matters is that he has produced an heir. My father-in-law stated without any sense of guilt. A young mistress who can give birth to a boy is obviously more valuable than an incompetent wife who can only give birth to girls. He shockingly declared, and I glared at him in response. By the way, that was right after we got married, wasn't it? Were you cheating on me from that time, I asked. That's right. You're 32, right? If the odds of having a boy are 50%, it's normal to think that being with a younger and incidentally prettier woman would increase the chances of having a boy. Matteo reasoned. This indicated his intention to make the woman who bore him a son his official wife. I was speechless at the ruthless and amoral things Matteo was willing to say. While I was stunned into silence, he continued, Charlotte is my wife. I'm divorcing you to marry her? Take that useless child and get out quickly. Matteo thrust the divorce papers in front of me with a haughty attitude. Charlotte snuggled up to him with a smug smile, looking down on me disdainfully. To them, I must look pitiful. However, they are unaware of how foolish they actually are. I find that profoundly sad. Do you understand what you're saying? Do you really think you can just get a divorce? My mother said firmly to them. Overwhelmed by her imposing presence, the smile disappeared from Matteo's face, and he looked at us skeptically. What do you mean by that? He asked. Oh, didn't you know? The president of the company you work for is Ava's uncle, and your current position is all thanks to Ava. Ava's uncle Matteo was visibly shocked. Indeed, the company Matteo worked for was managed by my uncle, my mother's brother. Matteo's promotions had not been due to any exceptional work on his part, but were all because of connections. If you divorce Ava, you'll also lose that position, my mother continued. Matteo had no idea. I hadn't told him deliberately so. He had a high pride, and learning that his promotions were not a result of his merit, but were facilitated by my uncle would likely infuriate him. Or, knowing the familial connection, he might take an even more arrogant stance or slack off at work. Either outcome would not have been favorable. Matteo and his parents were rendered speechless by this revelation. They were stunned to learn that the family of the daughter-in-law they had been looking down upon was actually the president of the company that supported their lifestyle. Ignoring their shocked expressions, my mother calmly continued, "By the way, you're no longer welcome at our company." "What? Why?" Matteo stuttered in confusion. "Well, you've been embezzling company funds, haven't you? That's already been discovered by the management." I was truly shocked when I learned this from my mother during my visit home. If this became public, police involvement was inevitable. "Even if you try to divorce and run away, we'll just report you to the police. What will you do now?" My mother's tone was calm, but Matteo's complexion turned pale instantly. Seemingly overwhelmed and unable to form words, Matteo gaped, shaking slightly. We waited for him to speak. If I don't divorce, can I be forgiven for the embezzlement?" Kneeling down, Matteo desperately asked my mother a question. However, my mother shook her head without changing her expression, denying his plea. "There's no way that could happen. What you did is a crime. It cannot be forgiven." After sighing deeply in disbelief, she glanced at Charlotte and continued. "You said you were going to divorce Ava and marry this woman, didn't you? As a man, it looks bad if you don't follow through on your decisions. Oh, and if you do divorce my daughter, you'll have to pay child support, property division, and repay all the embezzled money." Hearing this, Matteo collapsed to the floor as if all strength had left him. He then looked up at my mother and apologized as much as he could. "I am truly sorry. I can no longer live in society as I am. Please, please forgive me." It was pathetic. Seeing him like this, I realized that any affection I had for him had completely cooled. Perhaps my feelings for Matteo had been gradually eroded since I became pregnant. And now, at the moment his dignity was lost, my fear of him and my in-laws was also swept away. I no longer feared their words. As I looked down at him crouched on the floor, crying and sniffling in a disgraceful state, I continued after my mother's words. "From now on, you just need to make proper payments to me and the child. Adding what you owe to the company, it will be a significant amount, so even if you divorce me, you won't be able to waste money frivolously." Matteo was known for his extravagant spending, with unused expensive ties and shoes cluttering our home. He also purchased costly golf clubs under the pretense that they might be used for entertaining clients, though they never were. In response to my words, Matteo weakly nodded, while Charlotte made a displeased face, her lips pursed in dissatisfaction. Ignoring them, I turned my attention to my in-laws. I had something to say to them too. At that moment, my mother-in-law suddenly screamed, "It's all your fault. Because of you. We've ended up living like this." Matteo's mother yelled at me, her eyes bloodshot with anger, as soon as she saw me. However, what had happened was the result of their own choices, not my responsibility. This was a line I had heard before, but now it had no effect on me. However, my mother-in-law was furiously escalating her voice, and I found her behavior somewhat pitiful, swallowing the words I was about to say. Matteo then repeatedly apologized to my mother and promised to repay the embezzled money, so he was not reported to the police. However, he was fired from the company as a result of his actions. A year passed quickly, and currently, my child and I are living happily. The persistent criticism from Matteo and my in-laws had ceased, and I am mentally stable. Looking back, I can see just how abnormal life was before the divorce. Over time, memories of them gradually faded into the distance. Yet one day, unexpectedly, Matteo and his parents appeared before us, as if to make sure they were not forgotten. But they were no longer the people they once were. They looked miserable. They used to dress flamboyantly and appeared youthful, but now they wore cheap, pilled sweatsuits and jerseys. It seemed they hadn't been able to go to the hair salon. Their hair roots showed their natural color and were unkempt. It was clear they were struggling financially. According to what they said, my in-laws had squandered money recklessly despite their dire situation, and their wasteful habits hadn't changed. They had used up not only their own pensions but also Matteo's living expenses, buying luxury items on credit. Ultimately, they had to sell off their expensive possessions to keep up with payments. This situation was their own making, and I had no part in their downfall. Even after being fired, Matteo still clung to his previous industry, currently working part-time while job hunting. However, his reputation in the industry had spread negatively, and naturally, the circumstances of his departure from his previous job were well known among companies, making it difficult for him to return to his former industry or secure a full-time position. He's been forced to make ends meet through part-time jobs, but it seems all the money he earns disappears with repayments, property division, and child support. He reportedly survives by buying discounted bentos late at night at supermarkets, but even knowing this situation, I couldn't find it in myself to sympathize with them. While Matteo and his parents spoke, I could only quietly listen. During this time, I noticed Charlotte's child looking around the room, being led by my mother-in-law, and realized Charlotte was not present. As I pondered whether they had not married, Matteo, noticing my gaze, said with a defeated shrug, "Charlotte left. She abandoned me once I lost my job and money." I remembered Charlotte's ambiguous expression when I had once advised Matteo to curb his extravagant spending. She was only interested in my money. I was deceived by her. Matteo exclaimed. To my surprise, he revealed a shocking fact. He had thought the child was his with Charlotte. But after the child grew and resembled him not at all, he did a DNA test, which confirmed the child was not his. After I found out, she disappeared on her own. Matteo explained. As they spoke, holding the boy, seemingly seeking sympathy, a man appeared in the living room. He was holding a small boy who looked at me and smiled joyfully, his smile seeming to brighten everyone around him. Seeing his radiant smile filled me with affection. "Ava, who is this man?" Matteo's voice trembled with surprise. His reaction mirrored my own when Charlotte had first appeared at my in-laws' home. "He's grown, hasn't he? This is my son." The doctor didn't notice in the photos since his lower half was hidden, but actually the child born a year ago was a boy. Upon realizing that Matteo and my child was a boy, their attitudes suddenly changed. is that? Does that mean my child is a boy? Matteo asked. Yes, that's right, I replied. Matteo, well done. Now we can start over. What are you talking about? Oh, you should have told us sooner. That's great. My in-laws suddenly changed their demeanor and said this with smiles. Their way of thinking was astonishingly baffling to me. It seemed utterly irrational. Do they really believe that the world revolves only around their desires? Sorry for the late introduction, but this man is my husband. So there's no way I would start over with you, I explained. Your husband? What? Didn't you hear? This man is my new husband, I affirmed. When I introduced my husband to Matteo, he became furiously red-faced and hurled insults. That's a joke. Were you cheating on me? Don't mess with me. I haven't cheated. I met him after we separated. Don't lump me together with you, you who had an affair and a secret child behind my back. I calmly stated the facts. Enraged, Matteo staggered towards our son, attempting to forcefully take him from my husband. Stop it. What are you doing? This child's real father is me. Let go of him, you bastard. At this, our son began to cry out of fear, clinging to my husband and rejecting Matteo. Seeing this, Matteo came to his senses and lowered his hands. I glared at him sharply and said coldly, "Given that you've tried to harm the child, we can never meet again. You're truly despicable." But I didn't intend to harm him. The very fact that you came here uninvited is frightening. If you come near our family again, I will call the police. I warned them. Perhaps frightened by my words, Matteo and his parents hurriedly left our home. At that moment, I thought we would never have to deal with them again, but I was naive. Unable to give up on my son, they continued to contact us several times through messages and calls. I then hinted at getting a restraining order and firmly warned them. This is your last warning. I will not hesitate to call the police if it continues, which finally stopped their attempts to reach out. I was concerned about Charlotte's child, but it seemed that Matteo and his parents had largely neglected their duties, and following a neighbor's report to child services, the police got involved. Eventually, Charlotte's parents took custody of the child and were raising him with love, which relieved me when I heard about it from the police. Meanwhile, Matteo and his parents had garnered a bad reputation in the neighborhood and could no longer work there, prompting them to move far away. This finally freed me completely from my in-laws. I am currently expecting a second child with my current husband, and soon our family will grow. A lively and bright life awaits us. Imagining a radiant and happy future, my mother, my family, and I are preparing to welcome this new life. Right now, I am enveloped in as much happiness as possible, and I am deeply grateful to my family, who has always supported me. I have vowed to be a kind and strong woman like my mother, to protect what is important,